Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the most heart-wrenching and dramatic moments of your favorite daytime dramas. Today is a beautiful day to explore the complex, emotional, and often tragic twists that keep us all on the edge of our seats. Let's get right into the latest explosive developments that are shaking the very foundations of Los Angeles. The crashing waves of the Malibu coastline usually offered a symphony of solace for Will Spencer, a rhythmic reminder that the world kept turning despite the chaotic corporate and personal wars raging in Los Angeles. Recently, the Spencer Beach House had transformed from a bachelor pad into a heavily guarded sanctuary, a place where Will sought refuge from the relentless fallout of his violent altercation with R.J. Forrester and the subsequent, agonizing loss of Electra Forrester. In the wake of that devastating breakup, Melissa Dillon had seamlessly slipped into his life, moving into the beach house and filling the void left by Electra's departure. Will had convinced himself that Dillon's presence was a beacon of hope, a testament to the idea that he could rebuild his life and find genuine affection outside the toxic, intertwined webs of the Forrester and Spencer dynasties. He believed her whispers in the dark, her passionate reassurances, and her defiant stance against his mother, Katie Logan, who had ruthlessly branded Dillon a gold-digging opportunist. Will had defended Dillon with every ounce of his being, blinding himself to any ulterior motives. However, the universe has a cruel and unforgiving way of shattering the illusions we build to protect ourselves. For weeks, Will had been battling a persistent, rattling cough and a profound, bone-deep fatigue that he had conveniently blamed on the emotional stress of losing Electra and the heavy drinking that followed his banishment from the Forrester family. He had dismissed the physical symptoms as mere manifestations of his broken heart and the anxiety of disappointing his father, Bill Spencer. But when the coughing fits began to leave metallic, copper-tasting stains on his handkerchiefs, denial was no longer a viable option. The visit to the prestigious oncology specialist in Beverly Hills was supposed to be a precautionary measure, a simple checkup to prescribe some antibiotics and ease his lingering paranoia. Instead, the sterile, blindingly white walls of the doctor's office became the backdrop for the most catastrophic moment of his young life. The doctor's words felt like physical blows, each syllable a heavy hammer striking the final nails into the coffin of his future. Terminal lung cancer. Stage 4. Inoperable. The diagnosis was a definitive, inescapable death sentence. Sitting in his car in the hospital parking lot, the bustling city of Los Angeles moving around him in blissful ignorance, Will Spencer was entirely consumed by a suffocating vortex of internal turmoil. The sheer magnitude of the diagnosis was impossible to process. He was a Spencer, an heir to a massive global empire, a young man who was supposed to have decades of triumphs, mistakes, loves, and legacies ahead of him. The weight of his youth being violently ripped away left him gasping for air. Every dream he had ever harbored, every ambition he had discussed with his father, every hope of eventually finding true love and starting a family evaporated into the cold, sterile reality of his medical chart. In that abyss of despair, his mind desperately grasped for a lifeline, a reason to keep breathing through the panic. His thoughts immediately anchored onto Melissa Dillon. She was waiting for him at the beach house. She was the woman who had held him through his darkest nights of regret over Electra. Will convinced himself that Dillon's love would be the shield he needed to face this terrifying new reality. He envisioned her wrapping her arms around him, shedding tears of empathy, and fiercely vowing to stand by his side through the grueling, inevitable decline. The drive back along the Pacific Coast Highway was a blur of blinding sunlight and roaring engines, a stark, mocking contrast to the pitch-black darkness expanding within his lungs. When Will finally pushed open the heavy oak door of the beach house, the familiar scent of sea salt and Dillon's sweet perfume greeted him. The living room was bathed in the golden hour's warm, inviting light, painting a picture of domestic tranquility that felt almost offensive given the grim Reaper standing invisibly at his shoulder. Will's hands trembled violently as he clutched the manila folder containing his medical records, his knuckles turning white from the sheer force of his grip. He found Dylan sitting comfortably on the plush linen sofa, casually scrolling through her phone, her beautiful face illuminated by the screen. The anticipation of her comforting embrace was the only thing keeping his legs from collapsing beneath him. He needed her to be the anchor Katie insisted she could never be. Dylan, Will's voice cracked a fragile, hollow sound that barely resembled his usual confident Spencer baritone. He slowly sank onto the coffee table opposite her, the physical distance between them suddenly feeling like a massive, unbridgeable chasm. The vulnerability radiating from his posture caught her attention, and she set her phone aside, a mask of practiced, attentive concern slipping easily over her features. Will couldn't find the words to articulate the horror of his reality, so he simply extended his trembling hand, offering her the manila folder. He watched her face intently, bracing himself for the exact moment her heart would break for him. He expected a gasp, a covering of the mouth, a rush of desperate questions, and ultimately, the fierce, unconditional support of a partner ready to go to war against an unbeatable enemy. As Dylan flipped open the medical file, her eyes darted across the dense, clinical paragraphs. Will watched the precise, horrifying evolution of her facial expression. The feigned, gentle concern that had greeted him vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced not by the empathetic sorrow he had desperately anticipated, but by a visceral, absolute terror. Her eyes widened, the pupils dilating as she read the words outlining his terminal state and the necessity of immediate palliative care. The color completely drained from her flawless cheeks, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll staring into the abyss. But the terror etched into her features was not a fear of losing the man she supposedly loved. It was the raw, calculating panic of a woman realizing her meticulously laid plans had just been incinerated. The wealthy, glamorous future she had envisioned as the next Mrs. Will Spencer was suddenly replaced by the grim, grueling reality of hospital beds, hospice care, and the inescapable smell of impending death. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than any screaming match Will had ever endured with R.J. Forrester or even his own father. There were no tears of sympathy. There was no desperate, loving hug. There was absolutely no word of comfort offered to the dying man sitting just inches away from her. Instead, Dylan's survival instincts kicked into overdrive. She abruptly snapped the folder shut, tossing it onto the glass table as if it were infected with the plague itself. Without uttering a single syllable, she stood up, her movements sharp, rigid, and entirely devoid of warmth. She turned her back on Will and walked briskly toward the master bedroom. Within seconds, the chaotic sounds of a zipper being violently yanked open and hangers being shoved across the closet rod echoed through the hallway. She was pulling out her suitcase. Will remained frozen by the coffee table, his mind unable to comprehend the sheer, unadulterated cruelty unfolding before his eyes. The physical shock of her reaction temporarily eclipsed the terror of his cancer diagnosis. He forced his heavy, trembling legs to carry him to the bedroom doorway. He stood there, a ghost of a man, watching the woman who had whispered profound declarations of love in the dark, now frantically throwing designer clothes, makeup bags, and shoes into her luggage. "Dylan, what are you doing?" he pleaded, his voice a pathetic broken whisper. "Please talk to me. I need you. I am dying, Dylan. Please." He begged for the illusion to return, for her to stop packing and hold him, but his desperate pleas only seemed to accelerate her frantic, calculated movements. Dylan finally paused, snapping the locks of her suitcase shut with a sharp, definitive click. When she turned to face him, the mask was entirely gone. The sweet, supportive confidant was dead, replaced by a cold, pragmatic opportunist looking at a bad investment. Her eyes, devoid of any genuine affection, met his tear-filled gaze. "I'm sorry, Will," she stated, her voice chillingly steady and devoid of a single tremor of emotion. "But I can't do this. I cannot tie myself to someone who has no future." The brutality of her words sliced through his chest sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. She didn't stop there. "I am young, Will. I have my whole life ahead of me. I didn't sign up to waste my youth playing nurse to a dying man. I want a life, a future, a family. You can't give me any of that anymore." She delivered the killing blow with the clinical detachment of a business transaction being permanently terminated. In that agonizing, freezing moment, the truth crashed down upon Will with the force of a collapsing building. His mind instantly flashed back to the fierce, maternal wrath of Katie Logan. He remembered his mother bursting into this very beach house, pointing an accusing finger at Dylan, and brutally branding her a manipulative gold digger who was only obsessed with the Spencer wealth and the glamorous lifestyle. Katie had seen right through Dylan's innocent facade, recognizing the parasitic ambition lurking beneath the surface. Will had fought his mother, alienated his family, and defended Dylan's honor, convinced that Katie was just being overly protective and judgmental. Now, the devastating realization that Katie was 100% correct tore through his soul. Dylan's love was nothing more than a meticulously crafted, self-serving act, a theatrical performance designed to secure her status and wealth. The second the Spencer heir transformed from a golden ticket into a terminal burden, she severed the cord without a second thought. Gripping the handle of her designer suitcase, Dylan brushed past Will in the doorway, ensuring she didn't even brush against his shoulder. She walked down the hallway with the purposeful stride of a woman escaping a burning building. The finality of the front door clicking shut echoed through the vast, empty beach house like a gunshot. Her swift, unceremonious exit was a masterclass in cruelty. She left without looking back, without a single tear, erasing her presence from his life as quickly and ruthlessly as she had invaded it. The woman who was supposed to be his last pillar of support had effortlessly stepped over his broken body to save herself. The physiological shock of the betrayal, compounding the immense psychological trauma of his death sentence, triggered a violent, agonizing reaction in Will's failing body. A sudden, deep spasm seized his lungs, forcing him to his knees as a horrific coughing fit ravaged his chest. The physical agony was blinding, every hack tearing at his inflamed tissues, leaving him gasping for air on the cold hardwood floor. He clutched his chest, his fingers digging into his shirt, as the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth once again. The reality of the cancer was no longer just ink on a medical chart. It was a living, breathing monster consuming him from the inside out, and the pain was magnified 1,000-fold by the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his abandonment. Lying alone on the floor of the sprawling, silent beach house, the profound, suffocating isolation of his existence settled over him like a heavy shroud. Well, Spencer was utterly and completely alone. He had lost Electra Forrester to his own violent outbursts and corporate deceptions. He had alienated the entire Forrester family, transforming himself into a pariah in the eyes of Ridge and Eric. And now, he had been cruelly discarded by the woman he had foolishly chosen to trust over his own mother's warnings. The mental anguish rivaled the physical torture in his lungs. He was surrounded by millions of dollars in Spencer wealth, yet he had never been more impoverished in his entire life. As the coughing subsided into shallow, ragged breaths, the echoes of his past choices haunted the quiet room. He thought of his father, Bill Spencer, who had callously advised him to forget Electra and play the field, treating love as a disposable commodity. He thought of the violent rage that had cost him his relationship, the secrets he had kept, and the blind, desperate trust he had placed in a woman who only saw him as a bank account. The tragic irony of his situation was a bitter pill to swallow. He had fought so hard to prove his independence, to defend his choices, only to end up exactly where his mother feared he would be, broken, betrayed, and discarded by those who claimed to care. Will faced the terrifying abyss of his remaining days with a shattered heart and failing lungs. He was a dying young man, violently stripped of all his romantic illusions and naive hopes. The glamorous facade of his Los Angeles life had been ripped away, leaving nothing but the stark, terrifying reality of his mortality. Melissa Dillon's cold, calculating departure had not just broken his heart. It had destroyed his final shred of faith in humanity. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting long, dark shadows across the living room, Spencer closed his eyes, surrendering to the ultimate, inescapable tragedy of his existence, left with nothing but his regrets, his immense wealth, and a mercilessly ticking clock.